Welcome to All Home Care Matters, the show where we discuss all things home care, with discussions on important age-related matters and topics. Brought to you by Enriched Life Home Care Services, the #1 rated home care provider in Michigan by Top Rated Local.
Hello, and welcome back to All Home Care Matters. If this is your first time visiting us here at the show, we want to say thank you for taking time out to be with us today. We appreciate how valuable everyone's time is. That's why we try and make each episode here at All Home Care Matters something that hopefully matters to you. On today's episode, we have a very special guest, Lauren Dykovitz. Lauren is a caregiver and an author of the book, When Only Love Remains, Surviving My Mom's Battle with Early Onset Alzheimer's. Thank you for joining us, Lauren.
Hi, thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, it's our pleasure. So, Lauren, you were sharing with us that your mom was originally diagnosed with early onset dementia at the age of 62. And at the time you were 25 years old. What did that diagnosis mean to you? What did you know about early onset?
I really didn't know anything about it. Before my mom was diagnosed, in the process leading up to it, I had an idea sort of in the back of my mind that there was something going on that could be Alzheimer's, something related to her memory. But because she was so young, I never really thought that it was Alzheimer's. And so once she got the official diagnosis, I didn't really know what to think. Being 25 years old, I didn't know anyone who had a parent. I don't even think I really knew anyone who had a grandparent at the time. I just was not really familiar with it. It was just sort of that, people forget things is what I thought it was. And so I really didn't know much about it. And I didn't know anyone at all or anyone my age who had a parent with the disease. So it was, it was a lot to try to process and figure out exactly what was going on at the time.
So what did you do to educate yourself? Because I know for us, a lot of families that we help, when their loved one gets a diagnosis, whether it's early onset or Alzheimer's or whatever form of dementia it happens to be, they're left with a lot more questions than answers. And they say, where can we go? What can we do to better understand this? And that's part of why we started this dementia series, is to help educate these families. But when you're 25, you mentioned you have a full-time job, and you had to give up that job when you were 28 to then become your mother's full-time caregiver. What help or what resources did you turn to, or that you found that were helpful to you during that time?
When my mom was first diagnosed, this was in 2010. So social media was not at all what it is today. And there really wasn't anything, you wouldn't have even thought to look on Facebook, or I don't think Instagram was even around then. So none of that was even an option. I just went to Google and, Googled it. And the only real resource that I found was the Alzheimer's Association. And on their website, they sort of have, they have very comprehensive information and general information about the stages of the disease and things like that, which was very helpful, especially for someone who didn't know anything about the disease at all and didn't know what to expect. So that information was really helpful, but I was really looking for a more personal story of someone. And I was looking for someone like me that had gone through this or was currently going through it. And I couldn't find anything. And that is why several years later, which I'm sure we'll get into, that's why I eventually started my blog and sharing my story, because I wanted to be who I needed when my mom was diagnosed. And I really couldn't find anything out there of a personal story that I could relate to.
Yeah, and your blog, Life, Love, and Alzheimer's, has some wonderful resources, stories, and it's kind of all encompassing. Like you said, it's your story, and kind of you learned a lot of it trial by error and just as it went. And I think more families need that support where they have a place they can turn to, they can find these resources, and they can get it from people who have actually lived it and have been there. So how long after you launched your blog did you come out with your first book, Learning to Weather the Storm, A Story of Life, Love, and Alzheimer's?
Well, I started my blog in, I think it was the fall of 2014. So that was about 4 years after my mom was diagnosed. And during those 4 years, I didn't tell anybody really about her diagnosis. I had told a couple of friends who, of course, really couldn't relate, not their fault, but they just were never in that position and didn't understand what it was like to have a parent suffering from Alzheimer's. And other than that, I really didn't talk about it. I really didn't tell anyone. I sort of suffered in silence for the first 3 years until I eventually opened up in a post on my personal Facebook page, which I got so much support and so many people reaching out to me and saying maybe they were a little bit older than me, but their mom had Alzheimer's and passed from it. And so I felt like, wow, if I just start putting this out there, who knows who it might reach, who it might help. And it made me feel better just to finally start opening up about it and talking about it. So I started the blog. And right away, I've sort of always been a writer. I just like to say that I never had a story to tell before. And so I didn't really have anything to write about until my mom was diagnosed with Alzheimer's. And as soon as I started sharing our story, so many people were telling me how great it was, how helpful it was, and encouraging me to share more and telling me that I should write a book. And so I sort of blindly went into this and just sat down one day and started writing something on my computer. And months later, I started saying, actually calling it a book. And so I wrote it in a year. I happened to be living away from home while my husband was attending flight school. And so at the end of that year, I moved back home and became a caregiver again. And so it got put on the back burner for a while, and I kept going back to it. And eventually in 2017, my family made the decision to hire professional in-home care for my mom. And so I was able to be a daughter again, and I wasn't so much in that caregiving role anymore. And the first thing I did was publish my book. So I was able to finally do that once I had, time for myself and the opportunity. And I felt like my mom was being cared for. So I was finally able to do that. So it was about a 2-year process from beginning until end. But there was a lot of time in between that where I wasn't able to work on it because I was taking care of my mom.
So that leads to a good question. When you were going through this and kind of learning as you go, being that caregiver for your mom, it is a different relationship at that point than what it would be, like you said, when you could go back to being the daughter of the mom.
Right.
And I think that's really important for families. They often lose sight of that relationship quality when they are caring for that loved one because they're so involved with the caregiving aspect. They forget to take that time to then have that mother-daughter, that father-son, or that husband-wife, bond in that relationship. Now, what would you say to new caregivers listening or watching this who they're where you were back then, where they're just trying to find their way? And, I will say one fortunate thing is there are more resources out there now. They have books like yours. But a lot of them may not even have the time to sit and really dig through these resources. So they're grabbing information when they can and how they can. What is some advice you would want to give yourself now that you wish you would have had back when you started out on that journey?
Yeah, there's so much. You really do learn as you go. And even since my mom passed last year, I've just processed and really learned so much. I think at the beginning of my mom's journey and her diagnosis, I just was trying to keep my head above water. And I just felt so sorry for myself that what I had lost, it was all about me, right? I lost this. I lost it. My mom can't do this. My mom's not here for me. And I was very focused on myself and feeling sorry for myself and what I had lost. And I don't really know when I sort of made the change and transitioned to, well, this isn't really about me. I mean, it is about me, but it's much more about her. And she's still a person and she still deserves to be loved and cared for. And so it took the focus off of me and my pain a little bit. And I began to focus more on my mom and her care and how could I show up for her. And I also, in the beginning, I was still grappling with the acceptance of her disease. And I think, and what I thought at the time, and I think that what a lot of people, kind of a misconception is that accepting the disease means that you're just giving up and like, well, my mom has Alzheimer's, that's fine, that's okay. But it's not saying that it's okay that this is happening to your mom or your loved one. It's just saying that it is happening. And I still want to move forward and have a relationship with my mom and show up for her and be there for her, no matter what that relationship looks like and no matter how hard it is, because she does still deserve that. And so I went from sort of being in this denial and expecting my mom to be the person she was, or why can't she do this anymore? And why doesn't she remember anything? And feeling sorry for myself, to accepting her for who she was in that moment and realizing I'm still lucky that I have her here with me. As hard as it is, I'm still lucky and grateful that I have my mom and we can have some level of a relationship, and moving more toward the acceptance part of the disease. And that while I don't like that this is happening and I don't like that my mom is declining and I have to watch her suffer and go through this, I also know that I'm going to be here by her side throughout the whole thing, no matter what. And the biggest other piece of advice that I would give is to let go of the picture of how you thought your life and your relationship with your loved one was going to be. Let go of how whatever you pictured it to look like and just start creating the new picture of what is right now, because you can still have a beautiful and more, meaningful relationship if you just choose to focus on what you have and what you can do and what is there, instead of trying to force what no longer is.
Yeah, I think that's great advice. I think a lot of people, denial is one. They want to deny it. But then also I think they have this idealistic picture of, what mom and or whoever the loved one's relationship is supposed to be like. And then you get this news, and then that image is just now shattered, and you're trying to hold on to that. So you're spending that energy and that emotional energy on trying to maintain that picture when that picture may no longer be a reality, regardless of what it was, and making the most of what you do have. I think it's like you said, your loved one's still with you. I personally believe that they may not recognize you, but I still think they know somewhere that you're who you are, and keeping that in mind that, that loved one is still your mom. It's still your dad. They may not be able to verbally express it, but they know. I fully believe that. I want to read you something, but first I want to kind of segue into your new book, just released this month. I think July 5th. Is that right?
Yeah, it'd be earlier this month. Yeah.
And that's When Only Love Remains: Surviving My Mom's Battle with Early Onset Alzheimer's. #1 new release on Amazon. And I was going through preparing for our time with you, and I was reading one of the reviews that was just left recently, and I'm going to read this, and then I want you to explain what hearing this means to you and what your mission has become to try to help families and to be there for people like you would have hoped you would have had back when you were starting out. The review starts off, and it's 5 stars. We'll start there. It says, "I have been my mother's sole caregiver for over 6 years. Dealing with advanced Alzheimer's is extremely heartbreaking as well as exhausting. The feelings, both good and bad, are so real and heartfelt. And after reading this book, I know I'm not alone, and the feelings I have are normal. I received my book today, and as soon as I put my mother to bed, I started reading and just finished the book. Thank you. You have made such an impact on me and perhaps enabled me to have so much more compassion than ever before. That's all just a wow review for you. And I can't imagine what that must feel like for you to hear that and to see it based on your mother's story and your caregiving story.
Yeah, I mean, it makes me a little emotional because when I started out and sharing my story, that's more than I could have hoped for, to reach people in that way. Because I did feel so alone, especially at the beginning of the journey. And I wanted someone to relate to and to connect to. And I felt like a crazy person with all these thoughts and feelings going through. And, I would have loved to have heard someone share their story and tell me, this is normal, what you're feeling, it's validated. And it just means everything to me to know that I can do that for someone else, because when you're caring for someone with Alzheimer's, or just you love someone who has Alzheimer's, you're, in this little bubble of your little world in your home, caring for your loved one, and you feel so alone. But there are so many people out there that are also going through it. And if you could just connect with them and hear from them, they're echoing your thoughts and echoing your feelings. And it just, you can't underestimate the power of just not feeling alone in what you're going through. And I mean, I'm like speechless, because it's just amazing to know that I'm able to share my story and give that to people. And I just know that my mom would be so proud, and that it's her legacy, and that, I'm helping people by sharing her story, but it's my mom's story too. And it's a way for me to stay close with her and to carry on her spirit and her memory in just helping other people that are going through this. So, I mean, it really just warms my heart so much. And I mean, I don't even know what to say. I'm just so grateful. Just so grateful.
In reading some other reviews, I had noticed that one of the reviews mentioned that they had purchased your second book and they loved your first book. And I know we talked about this briefly. What would be the right book for a person caring for their loved one in the beginning stages? Is one book suited more for a certain stage than the other? Or what would you say separates the two books, if there is a separation?
Yeah, it's just one big story. So my first book tells the first half of my story, my journey with my mom's Alzheimer's, and the second book picks up where that left off into the continuation up until when my mom passes. So both are memoir told from, my recollection of what happened and how things happened, and my story involving my mom's Alzheimer's. The first book talks more about the signs and symptoms that we first noticed, our process and the struggle of encouraging and insisting that my parents see a doctor and getting her a diagnosis. There was a lot of resistance to that. And I write about a lot of what I was saying, the denial and feeling sorry for myself, and eventually coming to this place of acceptance. I also wrote about when my mom was diagnosed, like right in that same month, I got engaged. And so the first year of my mom's diagnosis, I was planning my wedding. And so there was a lot of heartache and grief and stress and wanting to include my mom, trying to include my mom, and trying to do that without her, but still trying to include her in some way. And so I know there are a lot of other young women who have a parent, specifically if it's their mother, because mother of the bride is, such an important part. And so I think a lot of people can relate to that, because, I don't hold anything back. I share it all. And then sort of when I made the decision to quit my full-time job and I became a part-time caregiver for my mom, she still lived at home with my dad, but he was still working full-time. So I was able to help out, which allowed him to keep working. And just sort of share some of the earlier lessons that I learned in coming to a place of acceptance. Then the second book picks up where the first book left off. And the second book talks a lot about, there was one year in particular where I was really in the caregiving role. And by the end of that year, I was near a nervous breakdown and made the decision that I can't do this anymore. And my sister and I, talking to my dad through various meetings and family meetings and things like that, we were able to get full-time in-home care for my mom. And I was able to just become a daughter again and sort of, I wasn't very good at living my own life while my mom was living with Alzheimer's, but I tried, and it did allow me to be her daughter again and to focus somewhat on my own life. And I moved away while my mom had Alzheimer's. So part of that's being a long distance caregiver. I went through a real depression living away from home, and we decided to move back. And then right when I moved back, my mom started transitioning, and she died just a few months later. So, and I mean, it's a roller coaster ride. Anyone going through this could relate, because life doesn't stop when someone's diagnosed with Alzheimer's. There's still other things that you have to deal with and that you have to do. And putting your life on hold while you're caring for a parent, or just knowing that your parent has this disease and they're suffering and you don't feel like you can live your own life. And so I write about, all of that. I don't really hold anything back. It's all there. And so I think there's a lot, depending on what stage you're at in this journey, I think there's a lot that people can relate to and hopefully learn something, or at least not feel alone in reading my story.
And, we do caregiver support groups throughout southeastern Michigan where we're located. And I think that is one of the biggest common themes, regardless of your caregiving role, whether it's for a son, a daughter, a spouse, a parent, and regardless of the need, they all feel isolated and they all feel like they're by themselves. And, that's one of the, I think, worst feelings that a person can have when you can't find somebody to relate to. Did you ever look into like a caregiver support group? Did you have the ability to do that?
I mean, yes and no. I the only ones I really saw at the time were from the Alzheimer's Association, that they had, their meetings for the chapter near where you lived, and it was sort of every Tuesday night at a church or something like that. And it wasn't for me, because I know the challenges and the emotions, everything, no matter where you're at in a disease or who you're caring for or how old you are or anything like that, that's all relatable. But I was so young when my mom was diagnosed that I just felt like there's no way I'm going to relate to these people, because I know the struggle is the same, but I'm in a totally different stage of my life than they are. And so I actually never even went to one. I never even tried. I really did not talk about it for the first 3 years. And then once I did start talking about it and writing on my blog, I saw how much that helped me. And I did find a few support groups on Facebook at the time, which I know is a big thing. And so just reading, I wasn't one to post a lot or engage a lot, but just reading other people's posts and other people's stories made me realize that I wasn't alone. And when I started sharing my blog posts through the support groups, I connected with a few other young women. And I mean, I've made real life friends with people that they don't live anywhere near me. I might not ever meet them in real life, but we talk on the phone or we message each other, because, you might be physically alone or geographically alone, but I promise you that there's somebody out there that's going through pretty close to your exact situation. And the one good thing about social media and technology is that you can connect with these people. You don't have to go to, especially in the past year with COVID and support groups and things being shut down. I think we've all sort of learned the importance of this virtual aspect of it. And I think that should continue on even post COVID. It's so much easier to jump on a call than it is if you're caring for a person. How are you going to leave? You can't go anywhere. You can't leave them home alone. And I mean, my family really struggled with that before we hired in-home care. My dad was the full-time caregiver, but he was working full-time. And he would come home from work and take care of my mom all night. And I was there most during the day while he was at work. But my sister worked full time. Other people in the family worked full time. Everyone had families and lives. And if my dad couldn't be there, and my dad and I could not go out and do anything together because somebody had to be home with my mom. And even when we were doing these family meetings to figure out the caregiving and hire a care agency and all those things, like we had to have somebody to stay with my mom just so we could meet somewhere and talk about that. So, it's hard to be able to go out to a support group when you have someone at home that you're caring for. So I think the whole virtual aspect of it and connecting with people online is huge. And, it depends on the person and what you like and what you're comfortable with. But I think there's a lot of people out there that are going through it.
Yeah, that's for sure. When you said for 3 years, you didn't really share anything, did you get any surprise reactions to the books, either the first one or the second one, from either your sister or someone in the family where they said, "Oh, Lauren, we had no idea," or were they pretty well informed and understood?
It's so funny because with my first book, I would say it was more friends and family reading it. And my second book, it's more strangers on the internet that are reading it because I've really grown my community and my audience since my first book came out. And so there's a lot more people, but people that know me and my family reading it. Some of them, knew a little bit more, but they would just, encourage me that it was brave to share the story and how strong you are for dealing with this and writing about it and things like that. But I would say, they pretty much, weren't necessarily surprised by what we were going through, but just, I guess, supportive of me sharing it and things like that. And I mean, my sister and I were kind of going through it at the same time. She's only 11 months older than me. So we were kind of going through that together. But I think people, they're very supportive and encouraging, and people who didn't know anything about the disease were, surprised at how much they learned and what it's really like to hear what it's really like.
On your blog, do you post regularly? Is it weekly, monthly, or?
I really just write when I'm inspired to write something. I mean, I've been working on this second book for a while, so it's been hard to write other things, but I share on social media daily. I post something every day, whether, it's a quote or a little story of something. And I try to share most of those on my blog as well. So that there's a lot of people that aren't on social media, so people to be able to read it. And, now that the second book is out, I definitely want to pick back up with my posts on social media and my blog and just sharing. I've kind of transitioned from writing longer pieces to I think people really like to hear little stories of things that happened along the way. And there's so much left to be said. I mean, there's 10 years of a journey with Alzheimer's and so many little stories and lessons along the way. So there's a lot to write about.
Do you have a story you want to share?
I mean, I have so many. Let me think for a second. I do remember a story that I write about in my second book, that when I was caregiving for my mom, she was in the mid stages, about halfway through. And I would go over the house every day to take care of her, be with her for a few hours. My dad was at work, and my mom always loved saying the Pledge of Allegiance. She just was very patriotic and loved everything red, white, and blue, and was always that way. And after she was diagnosed with Alzheimer's, she started practicing the Pledge of Allegiance every day. She didn't want to forget it. So she would start practicing it. And, I remember early on, my dad would ask her, what are you doing? And she would say, just practicing this, I don't want to forget how to say it and things. So that became something we did every day. We would say it. Usually I would let her go and see, how much she could get through. And if she was stumbling or having trouble, I would say it with her. And I would fill in the blanks and just sort of help her along and things like that. And so I was at her house one day helping her get through the Pledge of Allegiance. And when she was done, I, cheered for her, like, great job, Mom. And then she says, come here. So I walk across the room to her and she says, give me a hug. So I gave her a hug, and then I said, Mom, why did you want to hug me? And she said, because you're my daughter and I love you and you helped me, and thank you. And it was just one of those rare moments of clarity that she knew who I was, not only her daughter, but my name, Lauren, and she knew that I was helping her. And just one of those moments that made it so worth it, of all the sacrifice and putting my life on hold and being there to help her, that like, she really knows that I'm helping her, and I know that she's grateful for it and for me being here. And I know she's in there.
Yeah, that's a great story. That's a great story. How did this affect your dad with having the work, and then coming home? And I mean, I can't imagine the toll that must have taken on him.
Yeah, I mean, just devastating. He worked as long as he could, regular full time. And at a certain point, it became evident that full days, 9 to 5 wasn't really going to work anymore, with my mom being at home. So he would try to work a half day. He would tell my mom he was leaving for the day. He would have to make her lunch and have it in the fridge and tell her, your lunch is there, like, here, don't forget to eat. So he would leave for work, and on his way to work, he would call her to check on her. And if she didn't answer the phone, he had to turn around and go home. And eventually, my mom had trouble answering the phone. She had trouble talking on the phone. And so that became more and more frequent, of him leaving for work and never making it there, turning around to go check on her. And then if he did get to the office, he would call her right away. Sometimes he'd have to just turn around and go right back home again. Maybe he would be there for a couple of hours and then go right back home again. And he would say that he was working from home, but it was next to impossible to get anything done with my mom there. For a long time, she did sort of the shadowing, where she just followed him around. And she was always sort of like right behind him, following him, and just sort of mimicking his every move and just following him from room to room. And what are you doing? Where are you going? And it drove my dad crazy. I mean, it would drive anyone crazy. And he couldn't get anything done. So that was really difficult for him. But he didn't want to retire, because he knew sort of that would be it. That's it. This is the rest of my life now. And it was never going to be the retirement that he always pictured and that he had always hoped for. He always thought, my parents would get a beach house again, or he would get a boat again, and they would go and do all these things. And it wasn't going to be what he pictured. It was going to be him at home taking care of my mom as she progressively got worse. And it was just devastating on him. And eventually, we did encourage him to retire. It's time. At the time, it was just me helping out. My sister was working full time. And I said, we can't leave Mom home alone at all, like ever. You can't do that. And I wasn't able to be there all the time when he was at work. So he very reluctantly retired eventually. And essentially felt like a prisoner in his house with my mom. He would try, to get her in the car to go somewhere, but there were a lot of days where that was impossible to do, physically unable to get her in the car to go anywhere. And so if he couldn't, and he didn't have anyone coming over to the house like me or, another relative to sit with my mom, he was stuck at home with her. From the moment they woke up to, all throughout the day, go to bed at night. And some nights, many nights, she didn't sleep through the night. She would wake up yelling and screaming about things. And I mean, it was just devastating for him. And we did eventually hire the in-home care, which gave my dad a big break. But it was still really hard, just really hard. And not just physically in the daily tasks and the stress of everything, but just emotionally watching. My parents are high school sweethearts, and they've been married at the time my mom passed, they were married for almost 52 years. So to see your person, your high school sweetheart, the love of your life, declining in that way, and the loneliness and the isolation of that. And I mean, it was just devastating. My dad is still trying to recover from it.
I was going to ask, did the books, did that help him kind of like it's therapeutic for you, like you said? Has that been the same for him, or does he find it difficult to read about it?
I don't think he reads them. I think it's sort of like he's lived it. And so I think he'll sort of glance through it and maybe, read a few things here and there, but he lived it. And I know it's hard to think about a lot of those things. But I know with my second book, he's been kind of skimming through it a little bit. So, I do encourage him just to, like, I would encourage anyone just to journal about what you're going through. Like, you don't have to be a writer to write about it. You don't have to be a good writer to write about it. Just jot down notes and things, because it really helps you to process and just to, like, you have to have an outlet to get it all out. But to answer your question, I don't think he reads much of it. I think it's hits too close to home.
Sure. I know we had a family years ago, and the wife had very progressive, rare form of early onset. She was in her late 40s, and her husband early 50s. Neither one Medicare age, neither one retirement age, and it just came out of nowhere. And the husband had hired us for the help in the home because he was a supervisor at a local shop, and he says, I can't work during the day because I can't leave her alone during the day. So I go in at night when everyone else has gone home, but the owners would allow him to bring her to the shop with him. And, but financially they were not in a position to get the amount of help that they need. And, we recommended, in their situation, trying an adult daycare for memory care, drop her off in the morning. She can do activities, supervised, safe environment, and then pick her up on your way home from work. And they tried it for a few weeks, but her condition just didn't allow her to be a good candidate for that environment, because she was, like you were describing your mom shadowing. She would do that to the other people that were there attending the adult day, and it would scare them, and then because they don't have an understanding of what's going on, because they also have dementia. And he ended up having to put her in a facility, and it broke his heart. It literally started, say, on, I think he said it was like early February. And by April, this is what they were dealing with. I mean, it was so rapid, so quick. And the doctor, he said, is like 1 in 100 million get this form. It was so heartbreaking to watch, So I just have such an appreciation for families that are dealing with this illness, because there's so many things that could help them, but they may not necessarily be able to utilize, and right. We were just talking to a dementia expert from Australia, and he was just saying there's not enough support starting in our communities for these families dealing with dementia, because, looking at your mom's age of, 62 when she's diagnosed, she's not getting Medicare either, and your dad's not retired yet. And you're working full time, your sister's working full time, and yet you have this horrible, terrible illness. I call it an illness disease. And, you have to have the ability to be able to pay for in-home care, because Medicare and private insurance doesn't cover it, and there's very few other alternatives. And, it falls on these families. And, like you said, when you first started out, there wasn't all these great resources online and all these different blogs and websites and different things. And you had to learn a lot of it on your own. I mean, you want to talk about starting at ground zero with something and having to find your own way, it's terrible. There needs to be more education starting in the doctor's office, I feel, where these doctors can help provide the equipment and the tools for these families to help prepare them somewhat for what they're about to be facing. That's one of the things we get from families all the time. They say, well, yeah, we were diagnosed, but the doctor can't give me any tips for helping mom to eat, how to find the bathroom, all these different things.
I've heard it called diagnose and adios.
Well,
and it's exactly what happened to my family, what happens. I don't know what it's like today for the family that's getting the diagnosis, but it wasn't anything when my mom got diagnosed. It was put you on some medications that really don't do anything. And we'll check back every 6 months. And I was mind blown at how this doctor had no idea how to talk to my mom, had no idea how to interact with my mom. And it was mind blowing that it's a neurologist that doesn't know how to even interact with someone who has this disease that he diagnosed her with. And it's just a lack of understanding and experience with it. This is a disease that you really don't know unless you've experienced it or you work with people who have it. And we would just go sit in this doctor's office and go over her medication. And my poor dad would write these lists of questions for the doctor about, like you said, my mom's eating, using the bathroom. My mom can't do this anymore. My mom can't do that anymore. And I understand that these doctors don't have a solution for it because they can't give them anything that's going to fix it or make it go away, but they don't give advice or tips or resources to go to. I don't know if you've heard of Dementia Trailblazers, Dr. Natalie. If I encourage everyone to go follow her and her YouTube channel, because I wish I had had her when my mom was going through this. So much helpful information and so many helpful tips and ways to deal with different symptoms and behaviors and your feelings and everything as a caregiver, because they don't tell you that when you go to the doctor's office, and they don't connect you with someone like Dr. Natalie who can help you with that. And I don't know what it's like today for someone that gets a diagnosis, if there's more resources being offered to them. But there was nothing when my mom was diagnosed. And like I said, my dad would write these lists of questions, and I would kind of say to him, why even bother asking the doctor about this? He doesn't know, he's not going to answer you. And whenever I would, it's at least a 2-person job to take someone with Alzheimer's to a doctor's appointment. And especially when they get advanced, and my mom was in a wheelchair, and you couldn't just sit her by herself in the waiting room to go check in. I had to go with my dad. We both had to be there. And I saw how this doctor would talk to my mom and talk about things in front of her that he should not have been saying in front of my mom, and didn't seem to understand why, I would take my mom and leave the room, and then it would just be my dad in the appointment with just my dad and the doctor. But the doctor's like, well, I need to see her and evaluate. And no, because you're just going to upset her by talking about these things, you can't talk in front of her about the fact that she can't wipe herself after using the bathroom. You can't talk about that in front of her. It's just going to upset her. And when he would ask her questions and he didn't get a response, his solution was just to talk louder. And, it's just, she's not deaf, and so it's just such a lack of understanding and support and resources and
dignity.
Yes.
Oh, that's one of my things. When somebody has dementia, like we talked about earlier, they're still a person. They still are entitled to their respect and their dignity. If anything, they're entitled to it even more because of the dementia.
They're vulnerable.
They're extremely vulnerable, and we're supposed to help those more vulnerable than us. And it's really heartbreaking and upsetting. You hear where families go to these doctors' offices, they're trying to get information, and there's some good ones out there. I don't want to paint all of them with a broad brush, but it's the ones that they don't have an answer, so they don't want to be bothered. And we had a conversation with somebody about dementia a while back, and my thoughts on it, and as were theirs, if the doctor doesn't feel like they can solve it, cure it, or fix it, they feel like they failed as the professional. So they don't want to deal with it, instead of trying to help however else they may be able to help. They just want to discount it and move on. And, I just think, we lost some of that empathy when we're dealing with not just people with dementia, but just even our elderly and disabled population. These are still people entitled to their respect and their dignity, and they should be treated with such. Just because your mom may not be able to respond to a question or, answer something, where it's comprehensible, that doesn't mean she still doesn't deserve that dignity and that respect,
Right.
And, it's very upsetting because, like you said, just like they say about people in comas, it's been shown they can still hear and they still know what's going on, but they may not be able to respond. I feel the same way about people that are dealing with dementia, and you should always treat them with that respect and that dignity, and it's just, it's sad because, like you said, you're not getting that kind of support or those resources that we need for these families, because it can touch any family at any moment. We don't know. And it's just, trying to raise awareness. This gentleman from Australia we had spoke with the other day, they're leading a big campaign there in Australia, where when they have families that they meet with who have been diagnosed with dementia, they actually will go into these communities and the places that person frequents. They will go in and speak, no charge to the family, no charge to the establishments that they go to or these cities or villages. And they will try to educate everyone in that town about dementia. Now, Mr. Smith, if he comes in, don't hand him a menu with 40 different options on there and wonder why he's sitting there staring at it an hour or two later. You know what he likes. This is what the family says he likes. Go up, greet him warmly, kindly, and say, would you like your coffee and your favorite sandwich today? And then bring it to him, And it's just trying to modify how we interact with these families with loved ones with dementia to try to raise awareness to the ones that may not be familiar with it or understand it, so that they're not as intimidated or scared by it. And I think that's a lot of it too. We tend to shy away from things that we don't know or that we're not sure about or that we're scared of.
Right. And I think a disease such as Alzheimer's or another form of dementia, it is scary if you don't know what it is. Some of the behaviors and things that my mom did, people would be sort of taken aback or afraid of her. And, you get the looks from people, and I would try to take her out shopping or something like that. And because she was so young, no one made the connection that this would have never even thought that that's what it was. And they look at her like she's crazy, but even if she was just crazy, people need to have more compassion for people who have any sort of mental illness. And I think it's a big thing that I've learned in what I've gone through with my mom is that you never know what someone is going through. And just because they look okay on the outside and they're maybe young and healthy looking, you don't know what they're going through. And so if, the person that you think is being rude to you might have a cognitive problem and not understand how to interact with you. And, handicap, accessibility, I mean, just everything. We don't live in a society that's designed to, treat these people with dignity and compassion and what they deserve. I mean, there's just so many things that could be done, that need to be done. But I think it all just starts with awareness and letting people know there's diseases like this that exist. The person could be, like you were saying about the person in their 40s. I mean, you would never think that person has some form of dementia. And usually once people find out what it is, they are very compassionate, and, they might still be a little bit afraid or put off, they're not sure, they don't know how to interact with that person. But they usually are at least, hold the door for you and do things like that just to show compassion. And there's just so much in all aspects of just going anywhere in public with someone who has Alzheimer's. I mean, there's so many things that you're working against in trying to get, my mom didn't have a handicap tag on her car for the longest time. But she couldn't walk far just because she would get tired, and so if there wasn't a parking spot close up, we couldn't go. We had to turn around and go home. Or if you go inside to order food, it's hard to bring her along with me in line, but I can't leave her sit at the table by herself. I have stories of both things, different things that I had tried and how it went wrong. And it is trial and error in a lot of things, but it doesn't have to be, because people like me and other people who have been through it, we've been there and we've learned. And if we share, it might save people the stress and the hassle and the uncertainty of dealing with Alzheimer's and the trial and error, but there's different things that work for some people and not for others. As you were saying with the adult daycare, didn't work for that one person. We never tried that. My dad was very hesitant to try anything or do anything because he felt like my mom is not going to like it. She's going to resist it, and she's going to fight it, and she's not going to want that, and she won't go. And so it was, it was hard getting care inside the home and getting somebody that my mom could be used to and bond with. But we found an amazing caregiver who treated my mom like a person. She didn't treat her like an Alzheimer's patient. And I think that's the biggest thing in all of these areas, is just to treat them like a person. They're still a person, but maybe they need some moderations or more attention, more time. Just be patient, compassionate. I mean, that goes a really long way. And the caregivers really appreciate that too.
Absolutely. So Lauren, if you were going to write a third book, what would that book focus on? Would it be a continuation, or would this be more of a self-help guide with tips and resources?
Well, I do plan on writing a third book. I take a little break for a little while, but I would just like to do sort of a compilation of stories, because I think personal stories of different things that you've experienced, or a lesson that I learned and how I learned it. I really think that goes a long way in people relating to and learning from it, and just in helping them, because maybe they have a similar story that they can relate to. And so I have so many that I've already written, but I have so many that I have never told, and things that I still want to write about. And just, sort of a compilation of all of that, stories and some lessons that I've learned, and just some, meaningful quotes that can help people and inspire them throughout the journey, because, it is really hard, and nothing that I've said here today is necessarily going to make it any easier, or at least not any less hard. I mean, it's still difficult. It's heartbreaking. It's just so incredibly hard to go through this, but just to not feel alone and just to be, comforted and to keep hope and just show up every day with love. I mean, and that's all you can do. So
when I think that's what makes this so difficult, because even what worked today may not work tomorrow.
Right.
What worked yesterday may work today, and
Right.
I think doing what you're doing with the blog, with your books, with sharing your story with us and the Dementia Care Blazers, they, I've seen a lot of their videos. They're doing great work. And I think this is what it's going to take is all of these families, all of these individual stories and professionals helping to raise the awareness, get the information out there for families so that it will, one, help to destigmatize dementia, but also help to raise the awareness that these are still people. They still deserve their dignity and respect, but also what these families are going through caring for them. Because like you said, it took a while for your dad to agree to have the in-home care. And he was, probably respecting your mom's wishes or what he thought her wishes were, and didn't try for the adult daycare. So these families need that support. They need that sympathy and the empathy from everybody, and just allowing people to know what they're going through and to help them if they're the ones going through it, I think is going to be so important for the future of, how this is viewed and, how this is supported. And I know you also have a way for, we're going to put all of your information in our show notes with your links. And then is it an email newsletter that people can sign up for to get some free resources or tips?
I have a mailing list that I just sort of send out just an email, usually once a week or so. Just most recently, it's been a lot of book updates, but just like a story of something that I posted on social media or on my blog, but I would love to start putting together some newsletters or things. But yeah, there's just so much, so much. People ask me, what's your advice and I'm like, oh, it's a book. Like it's another book that I'd have to give you. There's no concise way. So yeah, can sign up for my mailing list to get more stories or tips, or just mostly, because I'm not a professional caregiver, but I like to say that I'm not an expert on Alzheimer's disease, but I am an expert on loving someone who has it. And so that's where I really try to help, because I know I'm not a professional caregiver. There's a lot of things that I fortunately never had to do for my mom because we had professional caregivers, but I'm definitely an expert in loving her through it and all of the emotions that go along with it. And I just try to help people through that part of it by sharing what I've been through and how I felt at the time and maybe what I've learned from it. Just to try to help, relieve their suffering in some way.
Yeah, I think that's wonderful, because again, we need more of that. That's why we have All Home Care Matters. That's why you started a blog and a book, to honor your mom and to help share your story, so maybe it'll help others. We really appreciate you being here today. It's been a real pleasure to speak with you. And we'll have the links for all of your contact and for the book. We highly recommend people read it and really listen to what you have to say from someone who has lived it and who's been there. Because if you haven't been, like you said, you can't really truly appreciate what it's like or what you may be facing down the road. So, Lauren, thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. It was so nice to talk. And, I just plan on keep sharing, keep telling my story, and just hope that it'll reach at least one person. So that's all I can hope for. So thank you so much for giving me the opportunity.
Thank you for joining us today on All Home Care Matters. All Home Care Matters is here to help families as they navigate these long-term care issues. We also, again, want to say thank you to Lauren Dykovitz for taking time out to visit us here on the show. Remember, you can listen to the show on any of your favorite podcast streaming platforms or watch the show on our YouTube channel. Just make sure to hit that subscribe button so that you'll never miss an episode. If you know someone who could benefit from this episode, please make sure to share it with them. And remember, you can visit us on allhomecarematters.com. If you have questions, comments, or suggestions, there's a secure, fillable form where you can leave us feedback. every form is read and responded to. We invite you to join us next time on All Home Care Matters, where we will be discussing everyday memory activities for older adults. Thank you so much.
Thank you for joining us today. We look forward to you joining us again on another episode of All Home Care Matters. To learn more about the show and to connect with us, visit us at allhomecarematters.com.